Okay, let's be real for a second. The economy can feel like this giant, confusing, and honestly super overwhelming puzzle. But it really doesn't have to be. Today, we're going to completely demystify how the economy actually works in this explainer of Thomas Sowell's framework from his book, Basic Economics. We're going to look closely at a pretty hard truth. What sounds incredibly good in theory or starts out with the absolute best intentions often breaks down entirely in practice. By the time we're done here, you're going to see the world just a bit differently. So here is our definitive roadmap for unfooling ourselves about how the world really works. We're looking at 5 core areas: incentives over good intentions, the real cost of choices, the truth about prices, how wages measured created value, and finally, why trade makes everyone richer. Let's just dive right in.
All right, Section 1, incentives over good intentions.
To really see how this works, let's look at a real-world scenario from back in 2008. The state of Maryland had a problem, right? They needed money. So policymakers decided to heavily tax their wealthiest residents to bridge that gap. Looking at the intentions here, Maryland had about 8,000 millionaires, and the math suggested raising their taxes would bring in an extra $106 million. Sounds great, problem solved. But look at the actual outcomes. By year 2, 2,000 millionaires had just vanished. They literally packed up and moved to other states. So instead of gaining $106 million, Maryland actually lost $257 million in total tax revenue. The policy completely backfired because they effectively rewarded those millionaires for leaving, and they took their businesses and jobs right along with them.
And that brings us to this absolutely crucial point. People respond to rewards, not intentions. You can intend to raise money all you want, but you have to look at what behavior you're actually rewarding. It's a foundational concept. Whether you're analyzing a state's tax policy, running your own business, or even managing personal relationships, asking what you intend for people to do is pretty much useless compared to asking what you're actually rewarding them to do.
That leads us perfectly into Section 2, the real cost of choices, better known as trade-offs.
At a microeconomic level, every single dollar you have can only be spent once. Think about buying a car. You could drop $50,000 on a flashy BMW. You get the beautiful leather seats, the whole shebang. Or you could buy a $20,000 Toyota Corolla. But look at that massive yellow bar. That represents buying the Toyota, taking that $30,000 difference, and investing it. Over 30 years, that initial 30 grand could grow to almost $250,000. So that BMW didn't just cost you 50 grand today, it cost you $250,000 in potential future wealth. Every time you spend, you aren't just spending cash, you're spending what that money could have become.
Which gives us our formal definition of a trade-off: giving up one thing to get another. The true cost of any choice is the invisible alternative that you sacrificed, whether it's your money, your time, or your attention. Once you start seeing the world through this lens of invisible alternatives, you really can't unsee it.
All right, moving to Section 3, the truth about prices, or what we can call honesty in scarcity. To really grasp this, the source shares this fascinating historical story. When Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev visited Britain, he was completely bewildered by how London could manage to feed millions of people every single day without a central government plan. He actually asked Margaret Thatcher, "How do you make sure people get food?" And her reply was brilliant in its simplicity: "I don't, prices do." You see, prices act as decentralized invisible messengers. Think about it. If you were the central minister of pizza, there's no way you could calculate the daily, constantly changing variables of cheese, tomatoes, and ovens across the whole country. But prices solve this instantly. When pizza is scarce, prices naturally go up, signaling suppliers to make more. When there's too much, prices drop. It's an elegant feedback loop.
But what happens when we ignore those messages and just control prices artificially? Well, imagine your school suddenly announces free unlimited pizza at lunch. At first, it sounds amazing, right? But word spreads like wildfire. Everyone shows up, everyone grabs extra slices just in case, and 20 minutes later, the pizza is entirely gone. The early kids hoarded everything, and the late kids got absolutely nothing. This chain reaction perfectly explains rent control in places like New York City. When politicians set a rule that landlords can't charge more than an artificially low amount, demand instantly spikes. People who didn't necessarily need a massive apartment suddenly want one, everyone grabs the extra pizza, so to speak, and because landlords can't charge a market rate, they eventually just stop fixing roofs and repairing the buildings. Maintenance grinds to a halt. Eventually, the buildings rot and landlords walk away entirely. You end up with thousands of abandoned apartments in a city dealing with a massive homeless crisis.
And as Sowell's framework points out, we can see this system break down in both directions.
When prices are set artificially low, like during an inflation crisis in Zimbabwe, the government forced low food prices, so farmers logically stopped bringing food to market because doing so meant losing money. Stores sat empty, and crops literally rotted out in the fields. On the flip side, India in the early 2000s tried the exact opposite. They set prices artificially high to guarantee farmers a profit for their wheat. The outcome there? Well, farmers logically overproduced to chase that guaranteed government profit, which resulted in 11 million tons of wheat just rotting away in government warehouses. Messing with prices breaks the system in both directions, and ironically, it's almost always the poorest citizens who suffer the most.
Okay, on to Section 4, Wages Measured Value. Let's see how this applies to our own paychecks.
Let's break down the math using a super simple lemonade stand. Let's say you hire your friend Maria. She's fast, she's friendly, and she helps you sell 10 extra cups an hour at $1 each. She creates $10 of extra value. You can pay her up to exactly $10 and still break even. Now think about Jake. He's a bit slow, he's always looking at his phone, and he only helps you sell 2 extra cups. He creates $2 of extra value. If you pay Jake more than $2 an hour, you are literally losing money every single hour he's standing there. It's not about being mean, it's just the foundational math of how any business survives. A business can only pay a worker up to the exact amount of value they add.
And that brings us to a number we hear all the time in economic debates, $15. The crucial point here, based on Sowell's framework, is this. If a law mandates a $15 minimum wage, but a specific worker only creates $10 of value per hour, the business is legally forced to operate at a $5 loss every single hour that person works, and no business can survive that for long. When forced to operate at a loss, a business owner is just going to adapt. They'll buy a self-checkout machine, they'll cut employee hours, or they'll just close the shop entirely. The hard economic truth is that you are ultimately paid for your results, not just your time. Finally, Section 5. Trade makes everyone richer. Cooperation, not war.
Think back to a simple schoolyard trade. You have a sandwich. Your friend has a slice of pizza. You trade halves. Did the total amount of food in the cafeteria change? No. But are you both happier? Yes. Trade creates value without actually creating more stuff. It is absolutely not a zero-sum game where one person has to lose for the other to win. When countries trade, they do it because one side gets goods cheaper than making them from scratch and the other side gets paid. Both end up with more than if they tried to build everything independently. It allows everyone to just focus on their strengths.
And honestly, even if you are better at literally everything, trade is still the answer. Imagine a highly skilled lawyer who charges $300 an hour, and they just happen to be incredibly fast and excellent at cleaning. Should they clean their own office? Absolutely not. If they spend an hour cleaning, they lose out on $300 of legal work. If they hire a cleaner for $20 an hour and use that hour to do legal work instead, the lawyer nets $280 for that time. Focusing on your specific advantage and trading for everything else makes everyone involved vastly wealthier.
But this whole system relies on honest feedback. Profits are basically the market's way of saying, yes, people want this, please do more of this. It's like bringing fruit snacks to the lunch table that everyone wants to trade for. Losses, on the other hand, say, no, people don't want this, stop doing this. Like spending your whole allowance on raisins that nobody wants. Losses are incredibly valuable because they free up precious resources like engineers and steel and time to go toward things society actually values. So when governments step in to bail out failing companies because they're supposedly too big to fail, it's kind of like paying the raisin kid to keep bringing raisins forever. It completely destroys the honest feedback loop of losses that the entire economy relies on to function.
So, bringing all these principles of trade-offs, value creation, and incentives together, we can actually apply this economic framework directly to our own lives and our own time management. Every single hour you spend doing tedious admin work you hate is an hour stolen from the unique skills you actually excel at. You don't win by constantly trying to fix what's broken. You win by doubling down on what is already working.
Understanding these basic economic principles won't automatically make you a millionaire overnight, but it will make it incredibly difficult for anyone to fool you with policies that sound good in theory but completely ignore reality. So I want to leave you with this final, profoundly practical question to apply to your own life today. What is your weakness stealing from your strength? Think about the invisible trade-offs you're making every day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this new perspective serves you well. See you next time.